That's S&S discounttire.com. Now you can shop, compare, price, order, and schedule your service.
Robinson along with Scott Hardy today, talking a lot about high school football that went on last night, comes back with a bang. As so many great games, there was an upset of a number one team. I wouldn't call the upset of the McGill-Tulane win over Spanish Fort an upset necessarily, but the number one team in 4A, Dadeville Nemesis, UMS Wright, they lose to Mary Montgomery. Now, Mary Montgomery is a 7A team. However, I wouldn't consider them a powerhouse. So they lose 7-6. And that game was at UMS Wright, apparently. So I feel like that's considered an upset. And Madison Academy now, which started out number 2 in 4A, they will move up a spot probably to number 1 now. Scott, let's go back to Dadeville for a second. I know you didn't get a chance to see the game, and the way the weather was, who knows how many people actually got to see the game if you were even in the stadium. Lightning blew a transformer with about 1 minute and 16 seconds left, so that ended up cutting the game short. I think Dadeville, the game went, at one point, I believe, was 21-20 Dadeville. It had been 20-14, and Dadeville takes the lead, but Jartavius Whitlow leads Lafayette back down and scores again, and after that it was just Whitlow doing his thing. I'm really, really impressed with this kid. He has moved up to a 3-star on most services. I know Auburn has given him a look. They have given him a scholarship offer. Now, is that a committable offer? I don't know. When I saw him play basketball, I thought he is a high mid-major kind of athlete. Now, that was back when he was a sophomore, so maybe he's grown a little bit more. He's the kind of kid to me, 10 years ago for Alabama Auburn, if they have Tuberville and Mike Shula, I think they sign him up. In this day and age in the SEC, it's very difficult to take chances on even local kids sometimes because everybody else is recruiting so nationally and the country has shrunk in terms of college football recruiting. Having said all that, Jartavius Whitlow is a monster athlete, and I love watching him play. I hope the best for him, and if he can get a scholarship offer to Auburn, more power to him, and I hope he goes over there and kills it because he's been a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and again, my familiarity with him, it comes from the basketball floor, but I'll flip it on the other side. This was a big game for Dadeville for multiple reasons. There was a lot of eyes on this game, basically because it was the homecoming for Kyle Caldwell and new offensive coordinator there. So there's some invested interest in seeing how this team does, at least from a local level, and probably not the best start that they were hoping for. But again, I think this is a team that still they've lost a lot of talent over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's been a drop off in some of their record wise. But I think they'll be competitive enough in 4A to at least make a playoff run, but probably not the best way you'd want to start the season, especially for a team that you somewhat consider a rival.
And if I'm not mistaken, it is going to be Dadeville and Reeltown next week. So two teams that come into this ball game 0-1 now, and so that game takes on even more importance. And it's obviously not going to be an area game, but it's one of those games that you just don't want to start the season off 0-2. You only have 10 games, and so you got to make hay while you can. That's going to make for a very interesting contest next week. Reeltown, they just couldn't get anything going against Notasoga. Notasoga's a pretty good team this year, and Reeltown could only muster 6 points on the board. Meanwhile, Coosa Central, we talked about their loss. They go down 50-28. But I'm more surprised. The most surprising score to me, maybe in the state, was that Prattville-Wetumpka score. And good for the Indians to get 55 on the board against Prattville. And, Prattville, they were gamers. They tried all night long. They were down big, and then they kept making a push. I think they actually got the lead late, but Wetumpka stormed back, took it again, and then they got to where it was enough of a cushion where it had to be a 2-score game. And I think in the end, Prattville scored late to make it 55-53. But if you had told me going in this evening, Prattville's putting up 53 points, I would have said there's no way they're losing.
Yeah, and it just seems like Prattville's been a weird team since Jamie Dubose left. There's been a different type of feel for the intimidation level, or that factor doesn't really exist the way it used to, and where the same way that Hooverville has maintained their stance within the state. But 55 points, regardless of whatever, that's too many. That's something you wouldn't expect from a Prattville team. So still first game of the season, I think kinks are still being worked out, but some of these scores were very surprising. And from a local level, I think Coosa Central rather, they're a team that's probably a game that they didn't see as a win anyway, but they have to maximize those opportunities to get to that 5-6 win mark again to be able to make a playoff push.
A couple other state games of note: Calera and May Jemison. May Jemison, their first year of playing football. They have Coach Kelvin White, and he played at Alabama. Calera is coached by Andrew Zal, who played at Alabama. So two former Crimson Tiders face off against each other last night. Calera gets the win there. There was a game, Pinson Valley taking on McAdory. And McAdory has a kid named Malcolm Askew who's committed to Auburn. And in the second quarter, I believe, he made an interception on defense, which I think is where Auburn projects him. But he also is playing quarterback. It's his first time playing quarterback in high school. And so the next play after he records that interception, he throws an 83-yard touchdown. And you felt pretty good about their chances. Those are the only points they got, though. Pinson Valley ends up scoring and taking the lead. They were down 8-6 at that point. They end up winning it 15-8. So McAdory ends up being upset last night. That's a bit of a shock. McAdory on September 16th will play Hillcrest Tuscaloosa. I say that because if you're into recruiting and you want to see an Auburn commitment take on an Alabama commitment, it's Brian Robinson with Hillcrest Tuscaloosa and Malcolm Askew with McAdory, and that will be a fun game. We'll run down some more scores when we come back. We're going to take another break on the Saturday Sports Countdown.
Y'all, we're clear.
Well, I guess it was just. Well, I guess it's today. Yeah.
Meet Bob. Bob just bought a new Camry. He loves it now. Meet Bob's neighbor, Ted. Ted just bought
What are you looking at?
Tunes.
Yeah, we're live. Take it when you want it.
Welcome back to the Saturday Sports Countdown. Luke Robinson, along with future councilman Scott Hardy. I don't know. Are you saying that? Are you going?
I don't really say that, but if you would like to.
If I would like to, okay, I'll say it. By the way, and I'm not going to get all political here, but big day coming up Tuesday in Alex City, right?
There is a big day. There's a local election taking place. So regardless of who you're voting for, I do urge you to exercise your American right to vote. It's a very important election, not only nationally, but from a municipal level. It's very, very crucial that things get corrected, and hopefully with some voter turnout that gets the solution that we're hoping for.
You know, and I think it's right. It's boy, what luck to find that $1.5 million about a week before the election. It's always the last place you look. You know, whenever I'm missing 1.5 million, I look under the couch. It's usually right there on the dresser, and I'm like, wow, there it is.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'm gonna stay out of that.
I know. You better stay out of it. I probably shouldn't even brought it up, but it's kind of a funny thing.
It is humorous. I mean, at some point you do have to. I mean, it's not. Now, don't take that the wrong way. It's definitely not humorous, but at some point it was kind of comical how delayed things have become. But hopefully this starts us in a transitional path where we're able to kind of move forward and get that behind us and look forward to the future.
And I'm not taking any sides. I mean, but if you were coming in to Alex City today and you just picked up the paper and you were not from here and you said, I want to see what the local flavor is, and you look in the paper and see cities missing funds located in files. Oh, okay. I'm sure somebody had misplaced petty cash. Oh, I'm sorry. It was $1.333 million with an extra $43,000 on the side. I mean, that seems like more than missing funds. That seems like catastrophic. But anyway, those are jokes for other programs, I'm sure. So let's just keep it here for high school football for right now. In 7A, we went over some of those scores. Brett and Randy, they called a game last night. I thought it was going to be a lot better game than this. I think weather had something to do with it. Hoover, Central Phoenix City. For the first time in 15 years, Hoover started outside of the top two in the largest classification in the state, and they started number 3. They were down 7-0 pretty early, and it looked like Central Phoenix City had their number. Markel Benton was having a big game. He got several big shots in on the quarterback, and then all of a sudden, Benton got a shot on the quarterback, but the QB, who is he is a rough and tumble kid, was still able to stay in the pocket, take the lick, and throw a beautiful ball to his receiver that ended up being about a 30-yard gain. And I think that was the play that turned the game around, because it was one of those moments where teammates look up and say, okay, if he can take that, I can take whatever they throw at me. And from that point forward, Hoover went on to win the game 23-7. So they went on a 23-0 run in that ball game. There was a weather delay, which I'm sure Brett and Randy were not very, very happy about. But and nobody was happy about. The game was actually on TV as well, and I saw Crampton Bowl cleared out. It's a shame because it's a fantastic matchup. You hate to see weather affect it. But in the end, Central Phoenix City does go down in that ball game. Spain Park, the number 5 team in the state, they beat Gaston City, the number 10 team in the state, 21-17.
Real quickly, Luke, can you challenge and from your game on Thursday and what the atmosphere was it well attended?
Yes, I thought it was very well attended. Now, the game I had was Demopolis against Hillcrest Tuscaloosa. So what you have to remember is you've got a couple of teams from the western side of the state. It's not necessarily next door to Montgomery. So I wasn't expecting some monster crowd, okay? And the weather was sketchy. I drove from Alex City to Montgomery that night, and I'm going to say after I got 5 minutes out of Alex City and 5 minutes before Montgomery, the weather was as bad as I could be driving through. It cleared up when I got to Montgomery, which was nice. But there was a lot of reasons for people to stay home. But the Champions Challenge is just, I mean, it's got to be the best kickoff event, one of the best in the country. HSA just does this so right. And what I love about it is this organically come this way. They haven't forced anything on anybody. They tried it at first where, okay, let's make it a jamboree style and just get some folks together and see what happens. And they realized it was more popular. They said, okay, well, let's tweak it and let's try and get teams that were either champions from the previous year, thus Champions Challenge, or runners up. Well, the problem with that is one high school team could win the state championship, be loaded with seniors, and next year lose everybody, and then they're not so good. So they had some bad games in there. And they tweaked it even more and said, let's center this around more kids that are being either really high-profile programs that we know are going to be good, or kids that are being highly recruited. So Jameis Winston's been in this thing. I believe Jeremy Johnson's been in this thing. Brian Robinson, that's one of the reasons they were in there. Now, they're the number 4 team in the state, too.
Kerryon Johnson.
And Kerryon Johnson and Leeds Madison Academy played last year. They had Daryl Marshall and Trey Nation. But this year, Demopolis, I think they get in more on their history. Stacy Luker is their head coach in his second year, and he's won 5 state championships at Sweetwater. So I think they expected a little more out of them. And Demopolis is just overmatched. Dude, nobody knew how good Hillcrest was. Their quarterback, who's won an MVP in baseball state championship last year when he led Hillcrest to a state championship. My wife would kill me for that because I always get on to her about grammar. I would leaded. But anyway, he led them to a state championship in baseball. So he looked like a kid that had won a state championship in some other sport playing football. I mean, it was really cool to watch him go out there, and you could see how much he grew. I think and then you got Brooks and Andalusia today in Crampton Bowl, and that's 2 ranked teams, one from 4A, one from 3A, but 2 top 10 teams. So I think it's a big deal. They know how to put together marquee matchups now. Yeah,
and again, I thought when they first started the inaugural event, I thought this was going to be a fantastic thing for the state. And again, I'm with you. I think for one, if you're selected, Benja also had the opportunity to play in a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. It's an honor to be selected in this because, again, it's, as you said, it's either one or two things. Either you had a tremendous year the year before and they're trying to get that spotlight up, or you're a team that they're expecting to. And I think that just gives more credibility to the program. So a lot of times, too, if a team may falter, but this is an opportunity still to get some high-profile coverage. And from a recruiting standpoint, again, maybe you're not that 4-star guy, but you're good enough to at least receive some type of offers. And I think, again, this just goes back to recruiting and the high profileness of our area. And again, I think Alabama, again, with your Texas and your Ohio's and Florida's, one of the top 5 states in terms of high school football.
Well, and it's unfortunate that the games have not been all too competitive these first 2 games, and that's just happenstance. I think last night more due to weather than anything, and some injuries on Central Phoenix City's part. I think their quarterback got dinged up. I think Markiel Benton got dinged up in that game as well. But I'm going to tell you, that game I called, Hillcrest, Tuscaloosa, and Demopolis, and God bless Demopolis. I saw them win a state championship in Tuscaloosa behind DeMarcus James, who had 293 yards rushing in that game, and they were strong. They beat a good Russellville team, but they were just completely overmatched. It was 42-0 with about 4 minutes to go in the second quarter. That's how bad it was. And Scott, I've never seen this happen in high school football. Their punting unit was so bad that they finally just said, we're going for it. The first time they punted, they were down 7-0. Hillcrest goes right down the field using Brian Robinson as a decoy. And I'll talk about this when we come back because it was a unique situation. This has been the most unique first weekend of high school football I've ever seen. So we'll talk about it when we come back. Give us a call, 256-234-6464.
Y'all were clear.
I don't think that's the number.
City. Satterfield is the Lake Martin area Big Green Egg and Accessories headquarters.
And y'all are live.
Welcome back to the Saturday Sports Countdown. Luke Robinson, Scott Hardy here. Get your phone calls in, 256-234-6221. We're going to start talking a little college football now. We would love to hear from you. Scott, you and Andy did Sports Call yesterday, which is based here in JR's as well. And it's more of an Auburn-centric program. And but I love it. I enjoy listening to it. And we do have a phone caller. Let's go ahead and get to that. Caller, you're on the air.
Hey there, Lou. And how y'all doing today? This is Jerome. I want to comment on that Lafayette and David game. I went there last night, and man, you know what? That was a great game. I mean, even though there was some physical game, and there was, you know, in the beginning, I mean, looked like David was going to try to take over, but I mean, Lafayette got a team. I mean, they're loaded, they talented, and if they stay healthy. The quarterback, number 7, he kind of got hurt a little bit. I don't know if you know that he got hurt a little bit. He sat out for a little bit, but he came back and started playing real good. And like I said, I was there when it started raining. I got out there in my car, and all of a sudden the big boom went out. I said, oh. But anyway, but it was a good game, and I'm hoping Lafayette to go all the way. I think they're going to do something that Lafayette ain't never done before. They go pretty well high in the state playoffs. I believe they'll win the area because I believe that they got the team. All they got to do is just put it together and believe in themselves.
Well, Jerome, thanks so much for the phone call, buddy. We do appreciate that. Glad to get a first-hand account of that game last night.
Can I get a go Wildcats, Jerome?
Y'all doing a great job, and I'm glad to be a part of Arizona City. Go Wildcats.
There you go.
All right. I like the way you think, buddy. See you, Jerome. Jerome, one of our loyal callers. Good to have him back. I asked the other day where he had been. We hadn't heard from Jerome in a while, so I'm glad that he's out and about and doing well. He's getting ready for Wildcat time. I know he's got that big foam paw that he's about to break out for the game next week.
He's a legend at the Charles E. Bailey Sportsplex, and so
I don't think there's any doubt.
There's fans, and then there's Jerome. So again, we appreciate Jerome, and as well as the rest of our callers being a part of the show for so long, but he's definitely one of our favorites. But you're right. Before the break, we were talking, or before the call, we were talking about Auburn, Ole Miss, or Sports Call. And so Sports Call, yes. And so how this came about was last week, Brett and I were doing the show, and so somehow we started just talking about perception of programs, and I said I thought that nationally, Ole Miss is probably perceived as a better program, not overall, like in history, but for the last 4 or 5 years, I think if you looked at both programs, you would say that Ole Miss is the better program. Now, it's hard for me to say that because the numbers don't necessarily suggest that that's the case. But if you look at the records over the last 5 years, Auburn is 8-5, 3-9, 12-2, 8-5, 7-6. So 38-27, 17-23 in the conference. Ole Miss 2-10, 7-6, 8-5, 9-4, 10-3. They're 17-23 and as well in the conference. But if you look at the upward trajectory of the conference wins as well as regular season wins, everything seems to be trending upward for Ole Miss. You can't throw out the 2013 team, obviously, but if you take that out, that seems to be an outlier comparative to what Auburn has actually been doing from a consistency standpoint. They've kind of been average.
Well, and also I think 2011, I would throw that out because – first of all, that was that Hugh Freeze wasn't there yet. He didn't get there till December of 2011. So I think it's a tough call. I mean, numbers wise, I mean, you can spin this thing any way you want to. Overall, historically, Auburn's a better program, and it's not close. Okay, the last 4 years, I would say Ole Miss may be considered the better program, despite the fact that Auburn has an SEC championship and played for a national championship. And despite the fact that Ole Miss hadn't been to Atlanta for the SEC title game. Now, they are still doing some very Ole Miss things. And I also think very quickly this pendulum could swing back if Ole Miss gets in any of this NCAA trouble, which looks like they may get into something. So I think, though, for the short term, Ole Miss has been the better program. But that's kind of like saying, I'm trying to throw one out there that was Arkansas was a better program than Alabama 2002 to 2000 or 2003 to 2004. I mean, I guess you could make that argument too. Alabama was dealing with some things. They had Mike Shula at coach. Overall, that's not a close comparison either. And I don't think that was your point, that Ole Miss historically is better than Auburn, because they're not. But for the short term right now, it is weird. There was an article, I want to say it was done by John Solomon, somebody on CBS Sports, and it talked about teams and recruiting rankings, and based on recruiting rankings and history, there are only about 13 teams that can win a national championship. Mm-hmm. Alabama was certainly on that list. Ohio State was on that list. LSU was on that list. Teams that are doing really well, Florida State, and Auburn was on that list. The thing about Auburn is, if you took those 13 teams, and Auburn is one of those teams that could win a national championship, they're probably number 12 or 13 if you ranked them. And I think that's about right. I go back to, there was a list that the AP put out. I think it was the AP that said the top programs of all time. And it had Ohio State at number 1. I think it had Notre Dame. How mad
were y'all work with?
I really wasn't that mad. And I'll tell you the reason I wasn't that mad. They did it in a mathematical way. If you do it in, you got to factor in more than just, they weighted it. This counts this counts this. And if you look at the overall picture, I think Alabama's either 1, 2, or 3. I don't think they're number 4. That's where they ended up mathematically. And that's fine. Still the 1 through 4, 1 through 5, really, you could interchange them all. And Auburn, I think, ended up 13 or 14, maybe 16, somewhere in that neighborhood. And in the end, that's about right historically. Wouldn't you say Auburn's about the 15th, 16th, 14th best team in the country for all time? And if you look at the number of wins, that's about where Auburn is. You look at number of wins, Alabama's number 3, number 4, somewhere in that neighborhood. Alabama wins national championship battle, no matter how you count them, but they also haven't spent nearly as many weeks at number 1 as Ohio State has. Of course, some of that is northern bias versus southern bias. So there were a lot of ways to skin that cat, but the point being that I think if you take a small sample size of 2012 to right now, you could make the argument Ole Miss has been the better program, because while Auburn went to a national championship game and has an SEC title, they also had some horrifically, horrible, unbelievably bad losses, shutout losses to Alabama and Georgia in 2012. They had some bad moments. A&M, they had some bad moments in there. So anyway, we'll talk about it more when we come back.
Yeah, we're clear.
Yeah, us. I'm trying to scarf down some of this delicious food over here at JR Sports Bar and Grill. Scott, we were talking to Auburn. Let's continue that talk. I believe they have a scrimmage today. I know Alabama does. And before we get into the current team, you had an idea, because Auburn's offense right now and their quarterback situation is a mess. Yes, I'm a Bammer, and yes, that's me talking and blah, blah, blah. If you look at this objectively and you say, we just lost what had to be the best running back in Jovan Robinson, you're going to be playing a guy in Cam Petway who is a bruiser, not bad, but I'm thinking, I mean, just for somebody for reference, Justin Fowler is his ceiling, right? I mean, is plus or minus?
Yeah, that's a fair comparison.
The other big backs you could compare Eddie Lacy, and he doesn't seem like an Eddie Lacy type.
He's not.
So, and then you have Cam Martin, who's kind of a slot receiver, playing running back at 177 pounds kind of guy. Then you got oh my gosh, Kerryon Johnson.
Johnson,
who's been
Cox.
Injured. Chandler Cox, who is, again, a fullback turned running back. So there's some issues there. Quarterback is totally unsettled still. So you threw out the idea, play the true freshman Woody Barrett. And this is a guy that comes in with a lot of accolades, watched his highlight film. I like what I see on film. He apparently has not set the world on fire at practice, but that doesn't mean much because he's a true freshman. But you thought, hey, we're not going to win the national championship this year. Let's just get him seasoned. I think that can work the other way, that if you throw a guy out there before he's ready, you can lose him confidence-wise.
And that's my fear of it. But I guess I'm looking at it to the point, and this is something I'll get your take on because you're on the other end of the spectrum on this. But at some point, you have to look at the landscape and say, all right, what's our true ceiling for this season? And so to me, even if I think John Franklin would provide the highest ceiling for win total, but he probably provides the lowest floor too. So he's looking at a 4-8 team or a 10-2 team with him. So you just don't know with one. But with Sean White, I think you're an 8-4 team with him regardless. But it's the game. The thing that bothers me is, it's all right if we're going 8-4 every couple of years, and then we do go for a national championship run or an SEC run. That's how it's been of late. But those 8-4 seasons are when we're losing to the Alabamas, the LSUs, the Georgias, and whoever else you want to throw in there, Ole Miss of late. So it's teams that, one, from a rivalry standpoint, you need to beat to change that perception, from a recruiting standpoint, all of those things. But if you're going 8-4, 9-3, but you're losing to the teams that are preventing you from going to the SEC championship or national championship, you're not accomplishing anything. So at some point, you have to address that. And I think that right now, Gus is clearly coaching for his life. But I think that people may be a little more lenient on the success of the team if they knew going in, like, if we're 2-3, which I think we're going to be 2-3, maybe 3-2 after the first 5 games, and that 3 of those first 5 include Clemson, LSU, and A&M. So I'm considering LSU and A&M, or LSU and Clemson a loss. A&M was a toss-up. So we're either 2-3, 3-2. If we're sitting there at 2-3 and Sean White's been the starter or whoever it is, maybe you just go ahead and put in Woody Barrett. And I think that you just deal with it because, one, you brought up the receivers that we have on the roster. If they're not getting the reps or the catches or the yards or the stats that you would hope for in a number one player, then that's going to prevent you from recruiting more number one players because they say they can't be successful in this offense or at Auburn. So there's a lot riding on the success of this season. And in particular, again, it revolves around the quarterback position. And Auburn isn't as talented at other areas to where they can be compensated in that, similar to like in Alabama. So I guess basically what I'm saying, I'm tired of going 8-4. That was the whole basis of that whole conversation. Actually,
you'd probably love going 8-4.
Well,
You've gone 8-4 in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But I think that, okay, I'm looking at this schedule, and this is true for every team out there. This isn't an Auburn thing. But as this Clemson game gets closer, and I listen more and more to Sports Call, people keep saying, well, this Clemson team, we can beat them. No. If this happens, and I'm just telling you, I don't think people understand. I'm not saying, abandon all hope, but Deshaun Watson is as good a quarterback that I've seen in the last couple of years. He's phenomenal. He is great. And I think that despite the fact that Auburn's defense has improved, they did just lose another defensive back in Jamel Dean. who was going to get some time. And they've still got some guys that are unproven. I know a lot of the names because I keep up with recruiting. I know Byron Cowart. I know Marlon Davidson. But they haven't been on the field yet. I certainly know Montravius Adams, but and he was a 5-star. But has he played like a 5-star since he's been at Auburn yet?
No.
Okay, so and Carl Lawson, I think he's very good. I keep hearing is how incredible he is, and then I look at the production. It's not there, and it's not his fault necessarily. He's been hurt. I'm just saying that's the way it's been. So we only have the sample size we have. So in a perfect scenario, could Auburn beat Clemson? I think the answer is yes. Do I think Auburn will beat Clemson? The answer is no. Same thing with LSU. I think LSU is maybe even a worse matchup for Auburn in the sense that they are so run dependent that they're going to wear the defense down. And if Auburn's offense can't get its sea legs under it and they go do several 3-and-outs, which I think they're going to be very capable of, then that's going to make it tough for the defense and they're going to get a little despondent.
Yeah, and I'm worried that it's not going to. We'll never. I'm not going to say we'll never, but we probably the days of that 2012 team, the 3-9. That was just there was a lot that encompassed in that, but that won't happen to that extent. But I mean, 5-7 is a legitimate record that Auburn could have, and it scares me because I don't. We and it goes back to the Ole Miss thing. People keep saying, if we don't do this, we don't that we're going to be Ole Miss. Well, shoot, we're there. Like we're there, and so A&M kind of came in a little bit because I'm always looking at who Auburn is comparative to, and Auburn and A&M are very similar programs, and they're dealing with some of the same things, and I look at that as a way of saying, all right, how can we sneak in there? Or what teams are coming up? So Ole Miss kind of took that spot that Auburn and A&M were fighting for that third spot in the SEC, and it's putting even more pressure. But the thing that separates Auburn again, and this is something we've been talking about ad nauseum, but the thing that separates Auburn from being a top-tier program is the inconsistency. So I get people's sentiment about we just played for a national championship 2 years ago or 3 years ago, 2010. So in 6 years, you played for 2 national championships, and that's never happened in school history. And I get that, but at the expense of what? Like I don't want to. I'd rather again go into every season knowing 10 wins. Yeah, and that's fine. You can't get to the dance, or you can't win the dance if you're not there. So that's my whole philosophy on that.
It is. Auburn is probably the most intriguing program in the country from that sense. I mean, they are a fascinating watch. Every year, you just have no idea what's coming at you. And their games are sometimes incredibly historic, kick sixes and comebacks. And then it works the other way. Last year, when they dropped so many passes against Arkansas, things like that. So, I mean, they really are one of the must-watch programs in the country. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the scrimmage they're going to have today. We'll be back in just a minute with more of Saturday Sports Countdown.
Yeah, we're clear. Yeah, we're live. Take it when you want it.
Welcome back to the Saturday Sports Countdown. Luke Robinson along with Scott Hardy. Scott, they are having a scrimmage at Auburn, aren't they, today?
We're still trying to confirm that, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to say that there is a scrimmage today on the Plains. And even if it's not, it's getting to the point to where those things need to be happening anyway. So I think we can dive into some of the position battles and some things you expect to have. We kind of broke down a little bit of the running back position. And in my opinion, I actually think, I know people didn't like Rock Thomas per se, but his leaving was even more damaging with the loss of Javon Robinson. So now you've taken a player. Auburn's been most successful when they've had three things. They've had a quarterback that can run, a good fullback, and somebody like an Ontario McCaleb or a Quan Bray, somebody who could run those lateral sweeps and that type of thing, because they're going to have a good running back, obviously. The numbers suggest that in this offense, you can pretty much, if Cap can get what he did, then I think anybody, or Peyton Barber can do well, I think anybody can do well in this offense from a running back. But how you're successful is having that lateral threat. So now you've turned somebody like Kerryon Johnson, who you were expecting to probably get 12, 15 touches a game, is now expecting to have to get 25 touches a game. And so that's not a bad thing. He needs them, but I'm not sure that he's built for that. Now, he's a tremendous athlete, great player. Obviously, we've seen all the things he was able to do at the high school level, impressed as a freshman. But to ask him to have an additional 10 to 12 carries or touches a game doesn't really bode well, I think, for the success for him individually.
Apparently, Auburn is scrimmaging right now, according to a couple of message boards. So be interesting to see how those stats come out. If they release stats, that'd be another interesting aspect. Man, I'd love to be able to go to an Alabama or Auburn scrimmage. I know that my dad is actually at the Alabama scrimmage today. So interested to hear some of his feedback on that. He's not as big of a football guy. He'll just say, ooh, that guy would look pretty good, or that guy didn't look very good. I mean, he doesn't give a lot of detailed insight, but it was funny. Yesterday, he got to see some of the practice, and he mentioned to me, he said, Alabama's got this one guy, and he said, it's the biggest human being I've ever seen. And he said, his name was, I can't remember. And I said, was it Raekwon Davis? He said, yeah, that was it. And I have a picture where I took a photo with me and Raekwon at the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game last year. And I'm 6'5", about 235, and I could have easily hidden behind this guy. I mean, he is one of the biggest people I've ever seen. And Dad said, in a team full of monsters, he stood out as a true freshman. So be interesting to see if he gets a lot of playing.
Some of the nerves, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's gotten to. I mean, that's again why it's hard to look at Alabama, any school in the country. It's hard for any school in the country to look at what Alabama's doing and compare your program to that. I don't think it's fair at this point, and it's harder for Auburn fans because that's your rival, in-state rival. I mean, that's all it is, 365 days a year. So you have to reflect on it, but. If you're Auburn, I don't think you look at the success of Alabama and judge that, or the success of Alabama and judge that as your program. But I will say this, I still stand by this. I think there is, in my opinion, there is a cultural problem within the not necessarily the athletic department, but the football program itself, because you look at the type of things that are happening, and I know people get into trouble everywhere, but Auburn's recruiting the exact same type of personalities, not necessarily skill sets, but the type of personalities that Alabama, the Georgias, the Florida, every top tier program. But if they come to Auburn, two things: either they're not developed properly, like Montravius Adams you mentioned, and so it's no fault of his own, or there's some type of behavioral problem, like a Javon Robinson or a Duke Williams. So I can't figure out what it is that happens when you get taught in that 334 area code, because I can tell you what, if Arian Foster had come to Auburn, it'd have been a disaster. I'm not Arian Foster, excuse me, Reuben Foster.
Yeah,
had come to Auburn, I'm
There's no doubt. I agree with you.
It'd have been a disaster. So that's the separation factor. There is when you go there, you may not play, and that's fine, but you only need. I think you don't even really have to be a starter or a big name player, and you're getting drafted out of Alabama. Now the credibility of that program has solidified their place in college football, and again, that's a direct product of the head coach. And I don't think personally that Gus Malzahn is a great leader of people, and we talked about somebody like Lane Kiffin, who I thought would be an interesting fit at Auburn because he's younger and he's a good recruiter, and you said he's probably not the best leader or manager of people, and I think that's the same thing with Gus. He's good at what he knows, and he's a great offensive coordinator, and I think he could exceed anywhere, any level of football on that perspective. From a head coaching side, I just don't think that he's the perfect fit for Auburn at the moment.
Okay, first of all, I totally agree with what you're saying. And secondly, I think this goes back to people love to lump all 5 stars together. Javon Robinson was a JUCO 5-star. But what people just conveniently forget, he was embroiled in a controversy about grade changing, and Auburn's name was involved in that very heavily when he was in high school. Now, a lot of it seemed to get swept under the rug, but he was involved with it. So he had some issues coming into this thing. The same thing with Duke Williams, another 5-star that, he didn't have necessarily the best rep coming in. Meanwhile, you look over on the Alabama side. I'm not saying, obviously some Alabama players have gotten in trouble. And I'll get into the Cam Robinson thing in a second. Kendall Sheffield, for instance, 5-star defensive back, leaves this past week. And I was listening to a radio show. This was a national show. Barton Simmons was on, one of the 24/7's, their main recruiting guy. And he said, here's the thing. Yes, Kendall Sheffield was a 5-star, and I'm sure Alabama would rather have him. But there's 5 stars and then there's 5 stars. Kendall Sheffield was a guy that every time he went to a camp, he didn't participate as much. There was always some kind of nagging injury. On the field, we saw all of his potential, which led us to rank him so highly. But maybe we should have factored in, okay, there is some level of competition he's not factoring in. And he said, I'm not saying the kid's scared. He said it's just weird that he wasn't out there as much when he should have been. So maybe we should have ranked him quite so highly despite all the athletic prowess he had. And so, when you get to Alabama and you see, oh, I'm not the only 5-star here anymore, and Nick Saban says, hey, man, I would love to have you. I don't want you to go. But if you're going to go, that's fine, and I'll release you to somewhere else. And that's exactly what's happened. So going back to Cam Robinson for a second, and you're talking about kids getting in trouble. Cam Robinson was a 5-star guy, and he gets in some trouble. But, the trouble he got in, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It's kind of like the 5 kids at Notre Dame who just got arrested. And immediately there were tweets out there, well, I wonder if they'll do more than Alabama did, yada, yada, yada. I kind of hope they don't for a couple reasons. First of all, marijuana usage is becoming much more accepted, and it should be. It's not a big deal. And people are finally waking up to this. It took me a long time to wake up to it. I was as anti-dope as I could possibly be most of my life until I finally looked around and said, maybe it's just not that big of a deal. Now, if you're driving and doing it, get in trouble just like drinking and driving. But if you're just sort of at the house or hanging with folks or just have it on your person and not high at the time, I don't see what the big deal is. There was a handgun in this situation too.
That's the scary part.
Okay, but there were 5 guys, and 2 of them or 3 of them got charged with having the gun. How's that possible? Again, I'm not trying to give these kids a pass. They should be in trouble. But I'm not going to throw these kids under the bus and say, you can never play college football again because you were in a car with 5 other guys and there was some dope and there was a handgun. Yeah, I've probably ridden in a car with folks who have had a gun in their car, and I had no idea it was in there. So I'm just saying people need to ease up on that. And this whole thing about, well, they had a chance, and now let's throw them out with the trash. I don't want to do that anymore. I mean, if it's something like what happened at Baylor, yeah, okay, I'm down with throwing him in the trash. Or at Penn State with Sandusky, yeah, I'm fine with firing him and him being under the jail. I'm cool with that. But for simple things like this, if it wasn't no violent crime was committed, come on. I mean, let's ease up on some of these kids. I mean, they're young kids, and I used to take a hard line approach too, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten softer about this.
I want to address that at the other side of the break. There are a couple factors that I think that people need to understand that's what's happening, in particular a certain word called spice. And so we'll come back on that after the break.
Yeah, we're clear. Showing love, taking when you want it.
Saturday Sports Countdown live at JR Sports Bar and Grill. Luke Robinson, Scott Hardy here with you on this muggy, little overcast Saturday. It's better than the torrential downpours we've been having and the horrible lightning and trees coming down everywhere. And man, it's been rough. But, Scott, we were talking about punishment for college football players. I want to talk about the Alabama scrimmage here in just a second, but this is a big topic for me now, and you and I have done this program for a while. You know I used to take more hardline approaches about if you do this and you mess up, just get out and don't no more second chances. And I've oddly enough, and it's not just because he's Alabama's coach, Nick Saban's the one who has softened me up about this. He has been the one that has convinced me, okay, for Cam Robinson, for instance, the situation happened in April or May or whenever it happened, and everybody was just so quick to say kick him off team or suspend him or do whatever. I mean, really, that doesn't make any sense. I equated it to if you have a puppy and that puppy messes up in the house and you don't find out about that until 8 hours later, don't go rub the dog's nose in it then. The dog doesn't know what's going on. You got to sort of act almost immediately. And that's what Saban did. I mean, they did. He was technically suspended from the team. They did do some internal stuff. There was a nonviolent crime. What is this hurting? And I say the same thing about the Notre Dame kids. If Notre Dame wants to suspend them for a game, for the Texas game, so be it. I hope they don't. I hope they play. I hope that Coach Kelly does something internally. And, again, if it was something like what some of the Baylor players were doing, put them under the jail, man. You can't do that. If it was a violent crime of some description, or if it was a situation even with like Javon Robinson. I mean, Auburn fans may want to say, well, we kicked Javon Robinson off for just having a bad attitude. There was more behind the scenes there, I can tell you right now. It wasn't just that one day Gus Malzahn said, I don't like your attitude. Javon Robinson already had several chances, just like Jonathan Taylor at Alabama, which, first of all, I didn't want Jonathan Taylor to come to Alabama. I'll say that to my dying day. But Saban did want to give him a second chance. He got in trouble, and he was booted immediately. And, you know, some of these kids, give them a second chance, and as long as there's nothing violent, then let them have that other chance. If they do something violent or if they mess up that next chance, if Cam Robinson gets caught in the same situation again, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily be all for booting him off the team, but I would be for something more tangible. And we're close to football season, so it makes sense.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a hard line of people starting to realize the type of kids today aren't the same as it was 15 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I mean,
actually, Scott, I want you to elaborate. The kids are the same. It's just they have more access to illegalities. It's easier to get to, and there's more cameras, there's more Twitter, there's more everything. How many times do you think Ken Stabler got in trouble? How many times do you think Brett Fullwood may have gotten in trouble? I mean, these kids always have been getting in trouble. They've been doing things that kids do, but now we all know about it. And is it fair to punish them more because we have more access to the info? I
think that's actually the biggest thing in that, and that's kind of where I was getting. That's something I wanted to address too. Is if you're a coach, especially in high-profile position of college athletics, this day and age of Twitter and just everybody's trying to get you in a gotcha moment, there's the point to where, all right, if you don't suspend them, then it's, oh, what are you doing? You got to take a harder stance on that. Then if you do, it's like, well, it was just this or that. So you're in a tough spot to really enforce some of these things. And at some point, I'm with you, it just becomes a nuisance to have to deal with it. So you have to just go ahead and address it. And public perception is always what drives everything. So if people think you should be doing it, then you got to do it. Or if not, it's in the reverse. So like that, I do respect Saban for standing his ground with the Cam Robinson situation, and he handled it the way he thought that it was supposed to be handled. But those types of things, again, aren't necessarily always happening at Alabama. There's been some things clearly during the Saban's era, but since 2009, which is when, I'm not saying Gus, but Gus has been around doing this since 2009, the culture of Auburn's, we'll just stick with the football program. The football program has had its fair share of black eyes. And so whether it be the robberies or whether it be even dealing things with like Cam or Nick Marshall, like the success that Auburn's had, now granted, you have to go back and look at that. most successful seasons we've had were people who had a troubled past from a legal standpoint. So again, people deserve a second chance, but if in particular when you're coming to Auburn, it's starting to scare me that that's what Auburn's getting to be known for. Is that?
Let me say this, a couple of things. First of all, just like I mentioned earlier, all 5 stars aren't created equal. All mistakes aren't created equal. I go back to, somebody would say, oh, okay, well, you were very against the NFL with a 2-game suspension on Ray Rice. No, that suspension should have been more. It was a lot worse act than what Cam Robinson did. It wasn't even close. They're apples and Ford motor cars. I mean, they're 2 totally different things, first of all. Secondly, when you talk about Auburn and their 5 stars versus Alabama and their 5 stars, people think to just look at that in a very general term. You got to get more specific about it. As I mentioned, a lot of the 5 stars Auburn has gotten have had some kind of past. Javon Robinson, Duke Williams.
But they all though. But I'm saying,
so my point being that some of these, if you're Brower and Coward is maybe the exception to the rule. Right? I mean,
he's good.
But that may go back to your lack of development. He seems like a good kid, but a lot of the 5 stars Auburn has gotten seem to have some kind of baggage with them.
Yeah, and
coming in.
But I think that's going back to Reuben Foster, for example. I mean, he the same personality that we're recruiting. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about the type of players we're recruiting. Everybody is in on. I mean, we're recruiting the same guys that Alabama's recruiting or the Georgia's recruiting or Ohio State's recruiting. I mean, we're going after the same guys. But when they come to Auburn, either they're not developed properly or even Jeremy Johnson, for example. I guarantee you that if Jeremy Johnson was somewhere else, he probably would be successful.
He'd be killing it.
He would. And it goes, just on an underlying level on that end, you look at Gus since he's been at Auburn, he had Chris Todd with 8-5, but he broke Auburn's touchdown passing record for a single season. He didn't develop him. He was already coming from another system, so he'd already had experience there. Cam Newton obviously had nothing to do with that. So you bring in not Kyle Frazier. Kyle Frazier. He comes in supposed to be the heir apparent. Garbage. 3-9 season. Then you come back with Nick Marshall. He didn't develop him. Jeremy Johnson's supposed to be the heir apparent again. Garbage. So it really is starting to think to me that it really is a coaching problem because it can't be every time we're missing on these 5 stars. At some point, somebody else has to be held accountable. And I think that's really what my biggest problem really is with it, is that Auburn really is just in a position now where if it can happen, it's going to happen.
Right. And the other thing is Auburn's 5-star, they don't have as many as Alabama.
That's true.
So when Alabama's don't pan out, they've got a few more in the back.
That's
when
true.
Auburn's don't pan out, it's a big deal because when Javon Robinson leaves, there's probably 1/5 or 1/4 of the 5 stars on the team.
That's true.
And Trey Williams, I mean, there's another guy that was a 5-star, and to me, he is a very Kendall Sheffield 5-star. Well, a 5-star that he seemed to have everything he needed, and the production was there, and he was a good player. But I saw his film. I never thought he was a 5-star. I thought he was a solid 4, and I believe he's a 4-star. He's been playing like a 4-star, and also he hadn't gotten a ton of development.
Yeah, you're gonna make me start looking more at the Tide here, man. Please.
All right, look, when we come back, speaking of the Tide, we'll talk about that scrimmage coming up this afternoon. We'll be back in just a minute with more of the Saturday Sports Countdown.
Yeah, we're clear. Y'all are live. Take it when you want it.
Welcome back to Saturday Sports Countdown. Luke Robinson along with Scott Hardy. And we've got about, 15 minutes left in the program, plus or minus. Let's talk a little Alabama scrimmage today. They are going to kick it off, I believe, at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And it's going to be a big scrimmage. I think this is going to be the scrimmage where you at least get it down to 2 quarterbacks. David Cornwell, in my opinion, is out of the race. He has been a little bit banged up. There have been some other issues behind the scenes there. So it's Blake Barnett, it's Cooper Bateman, it's Jalen Hurts. Among those three, I have the hardest time believing in Jalen Hurts' ability to win the job outright because he's a true freshman. I'm least confident in Cooper Bateman because I've seen him play, and I think he's more of a between-the-20s quarterback versus a red zone quarterback. And Barnett, who I think was the crowd favorite heading into all of fall practice, but Jalen Hurts has been so good that he has gotten a lot of momentum. It's just an incredible situation going on at Alabama. And the thing that makes it different, I think, from Auburn's quarterback race is that Alabama has an identity that's not associated with the quarterback necessarily. In football, it's always the quarterback. Separated more from the quarterback than, say, Auburn's. And I think that's why Alabama's quarterback race, while important, isn't quite as imperative that Alabama get this figured out right now as it is for Auburn.
Yeah, and that's really what's been the difference in the programs, really. And you're right, Auburn's success is so quarterback dependent, and everybody needs a good quarterback, don't get me wrong. But the other areas where Alabama excels everywhere else, so they don't necessarily have to put as much pressure on the quarterback. And so that's kind of been a saving philosophy, is to take that out of the quarterback's hands, because there's not a lot of positive things that can happen really and truly at the quarterback position when you're throwing the ball around as much as a team like Auburn potentially could, or some others. But for Alabama, I think, again, this is just going to be a year where it doesn't really matter. I know you don't like for me to say that, but I don't think it matters who's the quarterback at Alabama for the most part. I mean, you saw what happened with Coker, yes, 2 years ago, that forced Sims to be the quarterback at that point. So obviously it doesn't necessarily always say you can put anybody back there, but for the most part, with the offensive line that's in place, that you have on the outside, and the running back stable that you have, and the great defense, I mean, you're not really expected to do a lot. I see this being another situation where Alabama's probably giving up 13 to 16 points a game, and so you're not going to be really required to score a lot. So as long as you don't just mess it up, I think that you're on the way to another, at least, SEC championship opportunity.
I think that another thing that's going to be intriguing today is the running back situation, and that's what I've been more concerned with rather than the quarterback. Everybody loves to talk about the quarterback and the quarterback race, but I think running back is more important for Alabama. While you've got Bo Scarborough, and he looks like the love child of Herschel Walker and Bo Jackson, every practice it seems like I get a report that he is dinged up, that he was having a good practice and he got a little hurt. And sometimes those guys get so big that it's almost like they get hurt because they feel like they can take on the world. Well, the guys they're going against may not be quite as big as them, but if they keep hitting you enough, it's Chinese water torture. And so I feel like he's going to be always dealing with some kind of nagging injury. Okay, so then you go to Damian Harris, who was a 5-star coming out of Kentucky. Last year he played a lot, but as I've said several times, he is most known for not any of his runs. He's most known for running down a player who intercepted Cooper Bateman, I believe it was, and stopping him from returning it for a pick six after about a 90-yard chase. So that's not necessarily a good sign. What I'm really looking forward to is B.J. Emmons. He was number 1 running back in the country last year out of North Carolina. He was only a 4-star kid. It wasn't a banner year for running backs, but I've heard nothing but good things. And then Josh Jacobs out of Oklahoma. This is a kid that Alabama offered very, very late, but they really like the way he looks. So 2 true freshmen may get a lot of opportunities in Alabama's running back race. There's a kid named Derek Gore who was a walk-on that they thought may end up being a factor, but he has been hurt recently. So I doubt that he ends up being much of an issue for Alabama this year. Then at wide receiver, it's the best group of wide receivers I've ever seen Alabama have, and that's saying a mouthful. But you got to have somebody to get the ball to them. Then, of course, O.J. Howard. Did you see the T-shirt this past week?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think he may – this could be the year where he seriously gets the catches and or the receptions and yardage total that everyone's been expecting since he came out of high school. But I don't know. He's such a weird player. I think he's going to be an outstanding NFL player. I think he'll be 10, 12-year vet in the pros, but it's just they haven't really utilized him as much outside of the national championship game. They clearly did then, so that showed where his
that's the thing. He's had one big game. Now, that's probably unfair. He had a nice game against Michigan State, had a couple of catches, and then other than that, he had a touchdown in 2013, I believe it was, against LSU. And really, he just hadn't been much of a factor since then. But I was there for the national championship game this last year and watching him and doing what he was wide open a couple of times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't like he was the biggest he made wasn't one of the touchdowns. It was the little flip pass where he was able to get by, and he didn't end up scoring, but he ended up getting a 70, 65-yard gain. And that was unbelievable. But he's still got all the ability in the world. It happened. And to me, you know what? There is not much of a difference between and O.J. Howard. Look like the first guy you want off the bus. You want either one of them on your team. But production-wise, Carl Lawson, I would say he's had, one really good game, maybe one really good game. And then the rest of the time, it's all about potential. And I would say the same thing for O.J. Howard.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair comparison. Now, granted, I think the usage of both players is really based on, for Lawson's perspective, is really based on the injury total. But you said something earlier in the show about, not all 5 stars are created equal. And that's the same thing. You have to look at it too. Like, where are these guys coming from? A 5-star out of Kentucky or a 5-star out of North Carolina isn't going to equate to the same player as a 5-star out of Texas or California and Alabama or Louisiana. So that also plays a lot into it as well. But if you're getting the number one player in the state or in that particular state, which is something Alabama's been doing the last 3 years or so, they've been able to handpick players. I think that, again, your margin for error larger than it would be if you're playing for Auburn or some of these other schools. But I think that, too, people see 5-star, and that's great. But 5-star coming from Kentucky, again, like with Harris. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that he's the same caliber player as some others. We've seen it with Auburn. I've lost my respect. Now, nobody from Arkansas will get mad at me, but if you're a 5-star from Arkansas, I don't really, you can stay. Outside of Zim, but now he wasn't a 5-star, but he's really been one of the few players from Arkansas that Auburn's had over the last 6-7 years that's really produced.
Y'all need to just give up on Arkansas.
Yeah.
Use that only for duck hunting.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take another break. We'll be back in just a minute with more of the Saturday Sports Countdown.
Yeah, we're clear.
about 2 or 3 minutes left here. Scott, any closing thoughts as we're getting out of here?
I have to give a shout out to my boy Tim McGraven last night. Goes a 2-hit shutout. Obviously, he's not Greg Maddux, but there's been a lot of similarities. They had the opportunity to talk to him last night. So he's been on a major run the last 2 months of the season, in particular since the All-Star break. He's been dominating the AL West, and the Athletics are out of contention for the playoffs, but they have a heck of a player. He's become their number one starter. This was his 3rd year in the majors, so he's getting ready. He's up for a contract year more than likely. So there's going to be a good chance for him to see some dividends from his performance. But super proud of him. His brother Kyle, big fan of the show, and just a friend of ours in general. But very excited for Kendall and what he's been able to accomplish.
And Kendall, if you're listening, Sports Blitz always looking for investors.
Scott Hardy's looking for
Scott Hardy's looking for investors as well. Well, listen, we want to thank everybody out there for listening today. We really do appreciate it. And next week we'll have another big Saturday Sports Countdown talking high school football, and then we're 2 weeks away from college football, man. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than this. And that first Saturday, I hope the first Saturday of college football is half as good as the first Friday of high school football, Scott.
Are you in Dallas?
I can't do it. I'm having a baby.
Oh,
My
yeah.
wife is,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Good call there.
I'm in there. I've learned about pronouns. I need to say we. It's all we. This is our baby. It's we, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, I've learned a lot about all that here recently. So that's going to do it for Saturday Sports Countdown. For Scott Hardy, I'm Luke Robinson. Thank you guys so much for being with us. Come on out, JR Sports Bar and Grill. Plenty of time around here.
Have a good Saturday.
All right.